On February 21st, Stella Carolyn, a psychiatrist from the Southwest Community Mental Health Center and a colleague of Dr. Turner's, informed the public defenders that Dr. Cornelia Wilbur, world famous for having treated Sibyl, the woman with 16 personalities, had agreed to come from Kentucky to see Milligan on March 10th. Preparing for Dr. Wilbur's visit, Dorothy Turner and Judy Stevenson assumed the task of convincing Arthur, Reagan, and the others to allow yet another person to be told the secret. Again, they were forced to spend hours convincing each of the personalities one at a time. They had by now heard 9 names: Arthur, Alan, Tommy, Reagan, David, Danny, Christopher, but they had not yet met Christine, Christopher's 3-year-old sister, nor had they met the original or core person, Billy, whom the others were keeping asleep. When they finally received permission to let others in on the secret, they made arrangements for a group, including the prosecutor, to observe the meeting between Dr. Wilbur and Milligan at the Franklin County Jail. Judy and Gary interviewed Milligan's mother, Dorothy, his younger sister, Katie, and older brother, Jim, and though none of them could provide first-hand knowledge of the abuses alleged by Billy, the mother described her own experiences of being beaten by Chalmer Milligan. Teachers, friends, and relatives described Billy Milligan's strange behavior, his attempts at suicide, and his trance-like states. Judy and Gary were certain they were building a convincing case of a defendant who, by all legal tests in Ohio, was incapable of standing trial. But they realized they faced another hurdle. If Judge Flowers accepted the report by Southwest, Billy Milligan would now have to be sent to a mental institution for evaluation and treatment. They didn't want him sent to the Lima State Hospital for the criminally insane. They knew its reputation from many of their former clients, and they felt certain he would never survive there. Though Dr. Wilbur was to have seen Milligan on Friday, her plans were changed for personal reasons, and Judy called Gary from home to tell him. "You coming into the office this afternoon?" he asked. "I wasn't planning on it," she said. "We've got to go through this thing," he said. "Southwest keeps saying there is no alternative to Lima, and something in the back of my head says there's got to be. Look, with the thermostat turned down, the office is damned cold," she said. "Al's out, and I've got a fire going here. Come on over. I'll make you some Irish coffee, and we can review it." He laughed. "You twisted my arm." A half-hour later, they were both sitting in front of the fire. Gary warmed his hands on the steaming mug. "I'll tell you, I was really thrown for a loop when Reagan came out," he said. "What amazes me is how likable he is." "Just what I was thinking," Judy said. "I mean, Arthur calls him the Keeper of Hate. I expected something with horns, but he's really a charming and interesting guy. I believe him completely. When he denies the August rape of the woman assaulted at the Nationwide Plaza, and now I find myself wondering when he says he didn't rape the other 3. I agree about the first, it's obviously a copycat accusation, completely different pattern. But the last 3 were certainly abducted, robbed, and raped," Judy said. "All we get are bits and pieces of what he remembers of the crimes. It's damn odd, you know, Reagan saying he recognized his second victim, certain that one of them had met her before. And now we learn about Tommy remembering coming out and being on the spot at the Wendy's drive-in, having a hamburger with the 3rd victim, figuring one of the others was out on a date with her. Polly Newton's story confirms the stop at the burger place. And she's the one who said he got the strange look and quit the sex after a couple of minutes, and said he couldn't do it, and said to himself, 'Bill, what's wrong with you? Get yourself together,' and then told her he needed a cold shower to cool off. But all that crazy talk about being from the Weatherman and driving a Maserati, one of them was boasting. Okay, let's just admit we don't know what happened, and neither do any of the personalities we've dealt with. Reagan admits the robberies," Judy said. "Yeah, but denies the rapes. I mean, the whole thing is strange. Can you imagine 3 different times within a 2-week period Reagan drinks and takes amphetamines and then, in the early hours of the morning, jogs 11 miles across town to the Ohio State campus? And then, after selecting a victim, he blacks out. Leaves the spot, Judy corrected. That's what I mean. He held his cup out for refill. So in each case he leaves the spot, and the next thing he finds himself in downtown Columbus with the money in his pocket, and figures he committed the robberies he set out to do. But he doesn't remember doing it, any of the 3, as he says someone stole time in between. Well, there are pieces missing, Judy said. Someone was tossing those bottles into the pond and taking target practice. Gary nodded. That proves it wasn't Reagan. According to the woman, he couldn't get the gun operating for a few seconds. I mean, fooling with it until he got the safety catch off, and then missing a couple of the bottles. An expert like Reagan wouldn't miss. But Arthur says the others are forbidden to handle Reagan's guns. I can just see us explaining that to Judge Flowers. Are we going to? I don't know, he said. It's dumb to use an insanity defense for a multiple personality, since it's classified officially as a neurosis and not a psychosis. I mean, the shrinks themselves say multiples are not insane. Okay, Judy said. Why not just a straight not guilty without calling it insanity? We attack the notion of purposefulness of the acts, like the multiple personality case in California. That was a minor offense, Gary said. With a notorious case like ours, a multiple personality defense just won't fly. That's a fact of life. She sighed and stared into the fire. And I'll tell you something else, Gary said, stroking his beard. Even if Judge Flowers sees it the way we do, he's going to send him to Lima. Billy heard about the kind of place Lima is when he was in prison. You remember what Reagan said about euthanasia, about killing the children if he's sent there? I believe he would. Then we get him sent somewhere else, said Judy. Southwest says Lima's the only place for treatment before trial. He goes to Lima over my dead body, she said. Correction, Gary said, raising his cup. Over our dead bodies. They clinked their cups, and then Judy refilled them. I can't accept that we don't have a choice. Let's find a choice, he said. Right you are, she said. We'll find a choice. It's never been done before, he said, wiping the cream from his beard. So what? Ohio has never had a Billy Milligan before. She pulled her well-tumbled copy of the Ohio Criminal Law Handbook from the shelf, and they both went over it, taking turns reading aloud. More Irish? She asked. He shook his head. Just black and make it strong. 2 hours later, he made her read a passage from the handbook. She ran her finger down the page to section 2945.38. If the court or jury finds him to be not sane, he shall be forthwith committed by the court to a hospital for the mentally ill or mentally retarded within the jurisdiction of the court. If the court finds it advisable, it shall commit such person to the Lima State Hospital until he is restored to reason. And upon being restored to reason, the accused shall be proceeded against as provided by the law. Yeah, shouted Gary, jumping up. A hospital within the jurisdiction of the court. It doesn't say only Lima. We found it. Jesus, he said. And everybody's been saying there's never been an alternative to Lima for pretrial commitment. Now we've just got to find another mental hospital within the jurisdiction of the court. Gary slapped his forehead. Oh my God, this is incredible. I know one. I worked there as a psychiatric aide after I got out of the service. Harding Hospital. Harding? Is that in the court's jurisdiction? Sure, Worthington, Ohio. And listen, it's one of the most conservative, respectable psychiatric hospitals in the country. It's affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I've heard tough prosecutors say, if Dr. George Harding Jr. says the man's insane, I'll buy it. He's not like some other doctor who will examine a patient for 30 minutes for the defense and say he's crazy. Prosecutors say that? He held up his right hand. I heard it, so help me. I even think it was Terry Sherman. And hey, I think I remember Dorothy Turner. saying she often did testing for Harding Hospital. So we get him into Harding, she said. Gary sat down quickly, dejected. Just one thing. Harding Hospital is an exclusive, expensive private hospital, and Billy has no money. We're not going to let that stop us, she said. Yeah, how do we get him in? We make them want to take Billy. And just how do we do that? He asked. A half hour later, Gary wiped the snow off his boots and rang Harding's doorbell. He was certainly very conscious of himself as a bearded, wacko public defender confronting the conservative establishment psychiatrist, the grandson of the brother of President Warren G. Harding, no less in his luxurious home. Judy should have come. She'd have made a better impression. He tightened his loose tie and tucked his curled-up shirt collar into his jacket as the front door opened. George Harding at 49 was an impeccable, lean, smooth-faced man with soft eyes and soft voice. He struck Gary as quite handsome. "Come in, Mr. Schweikart." Gary struggled to pull off his boots and left them in a puddle in the foyer. Then, shucking his coat and hanging it on the rack, he followed Dr. Harding into the living room. "I thought your name was familiar," Harding said. "Then, after you phoned, I checked back in the newspapers. You're defending Milligan, the young man who attacked the 4 women on the Ohio State campus." Gary shook his head. 3. The August rape at the Nationwide Plaza was a very different kind of assault and will surely be thrown out. The case has taken a very unusual turn. I was hoping for your opinion in this matter. Harding pointed to the soft couch for Gary to sit in, but took a hard-backed chair himself. He placed the tips of his fingers together and listened closely as Gary explained in detail what he and Judy had learned about Milligan and about the forthcoming meeting on Sunday at the Franklin County Jail. Harding nodded thoughtfully, and when he spoke, he chose his words very carefully. "I certainly do respect Stella Carolyn and Dorothy Turner." He mused and stared at the ceiling. "Turner does part-time testing for us, and she has already talked to me about the case. Now, since Dr. Wilbur will be there," he stared at the floor between the steeple of his fingers, "I don't see any reason why I might not be able to attend." "Sunday, you say?" Gary nodded, not daring to speak. "Well, I must tell you, Mr. Schweikart, I have grave reservations about the syndrome known as multiple personality. Although Dr. Cornelia Wilbur did give a lecture at Harding Hospital about Sibyl in the summer of 1975, I'm not sure I really believe it. With all due respect to her and other psychiatrists who have worked with such people, well, in a case like this, it's too obviously possible for the patient to feign amnesia. Still, if Turner and Carolyn will be there, and if Dr. Wilbur is making the trip," he stood up. "I make no commitment for myself or on behalf of the hospital, but I shall be pleased to attend the meeting." As soon as Gary got home, he called Judy. "Hey, counselor," he said with a laugh. "Harding's involved." On Saturday, March 11th, Judy went to the Franklin County Jail to tell Milligan that the plans had been changed and that Dr. Cornelia Wilbur wouldn't be there until the next day. "I should have told you yesterday," she said. "I'm sorry." He began to tremble violently. By his expression, she realized she was talking to Danny. "Dorothy Turner isn't coming back, is she?" "Of course she is, Danny." "What makes you think such a thing?" "People make promises, and then they forget. Don't leave me alone." "I won't, but you've got to get hold of yourself. Dr. Wilbur will be here tomorrow, and so will Stella Carolyn and Dorothy Turner, and me, and a few other people." His eyes opened wide. "Other people?" "There is another doctor, George Harding from Harding Hospital, and the prosecutor, Bernie Yavich." "Man?" gasped Danny, shaking so hard his teeth began to chatter. "It's essential for your defense," she said, "but Gary and I will be there too. Look, I think we should get you some medication to calm you down." Danny nodded. She called the guard and asked to have her client placed in the holding room while she went up for a medic. When they returned a few minutes later, Milligan was cowering in the far corner of the room, his face covered with blood, his nose bleeding. He had smashed his head against the wall. He looked at her blankly, and she realized it was no longer Danny. It was the keeper of the pain. "David?" she asked. He nodded. "It hurts, Miss Judy. It hurts bad. I don't want to live anymore." She pulled him toward her and cradled him in her arms. "You mustn't say that, David. You have a lot to live for. A lot of people believe in you, and you're going to get help. I'm afraid of going to prison." "They're not going to send you to prison. We're going to fight it, David." "I didn't do nothing bad." "I know, David. I believe you. When is Dorothy Turner coming back to see me?" I told, and then she realized it was Danny she had told. "Tomorrow, David, was another psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Wilbur. You're not going to tell her the secret, are you?" She shook her head. "No, David. In Dr. Wilbur's case, I'm sure we won't have to."